Welcome to Horror Makes Us Happy, the podcast where we ask the question, why am I yelling at you? No, let's start that over.
No, it's good.
All right, take two. Welcome to Horror Makes Us Happy, the podcast where we ask the question, what is it about horror that makes us happy? Your hosts are Steve Becker and myself, Chris Whitman, and you can find out more about us at our website, horrormakesushappy.com. Before we get started, this is the trigger warning section. We're going to be talking about messed up stuff, horror culture, horror movies, horror literature in this case, but anything that could involve dark and macabre subjects such as murder, rape, suicide, child abuse, bad language, strong sexual content, and smoking. I've seen on rating systems now. That's a thing that they warn you about.
Okay.
Yeah. Society. We're doing it.
Listen to us smoking over the internet.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, I mean, I see it on TV shows. But anyway, enough tangents.
Sorry.
Can't.
I'm not even a smoker. I just had to do it.
Sounded like something was being torn.
We did have that one podcast where there was a very obvious bubbling sound at one
Yes,
point.
there was.
Like super intentional, obvious. Like,
Yes.
okay.
And then, oh, excuse me. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So now we're past the trigger warning. We're going to talk about fucked up shit and smoke weed out of bongs. Maybe.
Yeah.
If I can find
Yeah,
it.
that was the Joe Davis episode. Joe Davison episode, or Davison? I always mess this up.
Davison.
I think Davison.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's in the excerpts. If you've listened to any of our excerpts, that is definitely in the excerpts.
Had to put that one out there.
Yeah. So,
Anywho, let's see. Coming up for our release dates around February for Women in Horror Month, we're going to be interviewing a Rebecca Reinhardt, actress known for The Embalmers, Fright Vision, and Sister Krampus. Also, Kathy Koja. Damn it.
Koja.
Is Kathy Koja, author of such works as The Cipher, Strange Angels, and Buddha Boy. But today,
and also
we have...
City Cats. Sorry.
You didn't put that in the script.
Women of, well,
we're going to be releasing City Cats this
about,
episode.
Yes, I didn't know you were going to talk about the Women of Horror Month. Actually, so this is kind of funny. Last year, we wanted to do participate in Women of Horror Month, and I kid you not, like we talked to probably 4 or 5 different ladies, and every single avenue that we tried, every one of them had to either reschedule or couldn't do it, or something would come up, or it just wasn't meant to be. So this month I have gone with overkill, and we've got 4 ladies scheduled. So we might have like a February and a March, February and March for Women of Horror Month.
I mean, really, Women of Horror can be every month.
It could be every month.
And
It's
really,
just like
that
every
was
day
my
is
goal.
Halloween.
I'd like to have guests throughout the year, but I specifically definitely wanted to make up for last year. So yeah. Overkill.
Yeah, which we did. But today we have the company of author Laura Lee Bahr, known for such works as Haunt, Long-Term Religious Porn. Yes, that is a thing. I asked. Angel Meat, and writer-director of Boned 2015. Hi, Laura.
Hello.
It's long-form religious porn, not long-term.
Did I say long-term? Jesus Christ.
Long-term,
both.
But I mean, yes, it is. It is a long-term. Long-form is a improv term. It's a type of improv. But it's long form, but it also is kind of long term. So
I thought it was just the form that you had to go down to the Customs and Border Protection place to get, because it's longer than the short form.
It's that too.
Okay.
Yes. And
it's also the correct title of the book. I am sorry. Welcome to the show, Laura.
Mimeographed in triplicate. Sorry for the extended intro there. That our intros normally don't take that long.
It's a special one.
Oh man. I don't know how much we'd gotten to chat about this before, or if you've listened to any of our calls, but basically the gist of it is that we are going to talk to you about what excites you about horror as a fan more than as involved in your body of work, although I'm sure that might come up as well. And we come at it from sort of 3 directions: childhood, teenage years, and adulthood, because sometimes coming at it from these different directions can trigger memories that you might have forgotten. But that said, it's not meant to be a therapy session. So if there's anything you don't want to talk about, you just say pass and we'll move on.
But can it be a therapy session?
It absolutely can.
I could probably really use it, actually.
It absolutely can, and I think many of them have been.
More often than not, it ends up being one.
I've been trying really hard to get a therapist for the last year and a half, but they are tapped out.
Yeah, I'm sure.
We're we have a waiting list a year and a half long. That's
sheesh.
I can't imagine.
Well, I'm not a licensed therapist, but I've had a lot of counseling myself, and I think I'm up to something like 19 years in a 12-step program now. So I've got some background. We can talk.
Great, wonderful.
Starting with your childhood, what are some of your earliest memories of scary things?
So there are two things that really scared me when I was a child. The thing that scared me a lot was other people's dads. I was always scared of other people's fathers. I wasn't scared of my dad. He was awesome, is awesome. But there was something about grown men that just terrified me. So I constantly there was something about what I perceived of as their anger and they were physically scary to me. So I was always scared of serial killers. I lived in Utah, and Ted Bundy had already been caught at that point, but I can remember at one point he had escaped, and I was very young and just kept feeling like, oh my gosh, this person could come out and kill me. I don't know. So I was scared of serial killers.
That's a legitimate fear.
And I had I had an experience when I was 7 years old I was sitting by a pool, and I had this thought. I was laying down on the concrete, and I was getting warm, and I had this thought about, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? And the first thought that came into my head was oh, I'm Laura Bahr, and then this other thing was no, you're not. And then I was well, and this is my family. I have this family, and I believe in this church. And and all of a sudden, everything that I thought of, I realized that was not me, that none of those things that I could think were me. And everything that I'd seen or experienced or thought was myself was not who I was at all. And this feeling of rushing through space started to happen in my head. And I had to just open my eyes and stop thinking because it was so scary to me.
At what age was this?
I always think of myself as 7, but I was probably maybe even 6 or 5.
Okay, so at a very young age, you basically had an existential crisis.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I know I'm me, but what is the me that's here that's actually me represent? And what's the difference in between my concept of me and everyone else's concept of me? And you know what? I'm going to play hopscotch.
Yeah, right. I better not think about that.
I'm wondering if you overheard something that maybe one of your parents was watching or listening to or something like that. And because that's not really normally something a kid would normally think about.
It's a very complex construct for a child.
Yeah, it wasn't the thing that was so terrifying about it was that I didn't know how to think like that. I mean, it just started, it happened to me. It felt like it was happening to me. It was almost like I turned down, I got off of the path and I just looked and I saw something I shouldn't. And then I could never unsee it.
I would say that all the more so maybe supports the theory of overhearing it somehow, because that way, your subconscious mind grabbed onto it and remembered it, and it popped in later, and it's like a thought that's happening to you rather than coming from your mind.
Yeah, and I can remember trying to tell one of my friends about it, and telling them how scary it was, and they were like, "What?"
Right.
Right. I don't get. What do you mean you're not you? Of course you're you.
Right.
Yeah.
As a kid, I did not spend a lot of time around adults. I spent most of my time, I had a lot of siblings, and I spent, most of my time with my siblings. And or tried to be by myself, it's probably more likely that I read something than that I heard something, I bet. Also, where I lived, things were pretty, existential questions were not addressed.
It could have been something as simple as just flipping channels through it.
The idea of self-inquiry where I lived, like the idea of like, who are you, was so much more communally defined that like the individual was never, for living in a very individualistic culture, my childhood was very much about community and communal sort of understanding of identity. So
I think that's a lot more common than, I don't know about you, but maybe a lot of people think, even as an adult, part of the 12-step group that I was part of, very often people would come into those and realize that they had no sense of self other than, as you say, who they're related to, what their job is, how much money they have, what car they have. There was no self-identification except for things outside of themselves.
Yeah. Right. Because there's this, we don't have, I don't think we have a very strong sense of the void in Western civilization.
Potentially, but what do you mean by the void?
The kind of Eastern idea of like, let's say zero or nothingness, or, the primordial blackness from which all life emerges, that idea of cultivating nothing, of cultivating silence, of cultivating, the absence rather than the presence.
Yeah. Yeah, we're more about building over here in the West. It's always just progress and building.
If the Western culture is primarily Christian culture, and in Christian culture, nobody really thinks about there being anything before God. So,
so there was always
Christian
something
mindset. Yeah, exactly. Going back, I want to go back to the other people's dads thing. That's kind of interesting too. Was it, how can I say this? I've heard stories about, for example, babies or even pets, having issues, for example, with men with facial hair or wearing hats. Was there any common denominator, or was it all men?
It was mostly like I was scared of, I wasn't around like just general men. I was just around so the only time I would encounter grown men was like other people's dads, people I was friends with, or like my parents' friends, or like my uncles or whatever. It was this kind of understanding that men, I think, felt like they had like, and when you bring up the animal sense, like this kind of like rage inside of them, like they had this like ability to just like they always seemed to me like holding in rage.
Yeah, like was it potential energy versus kinetic energy?
Yeah, like
storing that possibility of
right. Like there was always like a kind of like very much like an animal sense of like these creatures are these ones you don't like, like people my own age were dangerous for their own reason, or teenagers were dangerous for that reason, but like
these are the full-grown animals.
Grown men are like, you want to avoid them.
Yes. Did you get stepped on as a baby?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I had a lot of siblings, like I said, so we had a fairly raucous and vibrant hierarchy of
Just out of curiosity, how many siblings?
So I have 7 biological siblings, and then I have 5 step siblings, but I never lived with those siblings.
Thanksgiving has to be fun.
Well, we don't really like. It's very rare. I mean, we have like a reunion every couple of years. But
you have to rent a hall.
Yeah,
right.
Totally.
This year's Thanksgiving will be at the Marriott. Which room? The whole thing.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, you get a nice discount on the rooms.
Yeah.
Sometimes, yeah. You have to really work on that, though. You have to like organize. You have to have an organizer.
Of the 7, where were you in the order?
I am. So there's 8 total. I have 7 siblings. I am
sorry,
6th.
you're right.
I'm 6th in the lineup, and there's 5 years between me and my next oldest sibling. So I had a very active older sibling group that were sort of like these are the older siblings, and then me and my younger brother and my younger sister were all about a year from each other apart.
Kind of like when a TV show does like a revamp next generation thing, and then you have your original older crew, and then the next gen, like the younger crew, like Tiny Toons, you know?
Yeah.
Okay, so other people's dads, serial killers, existentialism. Any horror media in terms of cartoons, books, movies?
So I definitely, I was raised in a very religious culture that really prohibited media that was deemed inappropriate. So I probably didn't, the first kind of adult movie that I saw, and I don't mean adult as in porn, I mean it like, for adults, was like Raiders of the Lost Ark.
That was pretty scary. That guy's face melted.
Yeah. That movie just, it was my favorite. It was my favorite movie. After I saw that movie, I was like, I want to be that movie. That's what I want to be. I want to be that movie. And how old were you? I loved it. I don't know exactly. I mean, maybe like, what year did it come out?
Late 70s?
80 something?
I was older than 6 and younger than 10.
Okay, so still childhood.
I think. Yeah. And
81.
I should clarify, when I said horror media, I didn't necessarily mean like, horror movies and stuff like that. I was thinking in terms of, what potentially scared you as a child, because, we've had, for example, one of our guests mentioned that, what was it? Fievel's Tales, Lost in America. There was a scene in there that scared him, like.
I think it was Rescue Rangers, maybe. One of those classic animations scared them just because the villain was so over animated.
Yeah, I can remember seeing. I saw commercials for The Shining, and I remember the kid running in the snow. That terrified me. That commercial terrified me, and I can remember being really afraid of being like kidnapped or murdered, or somebody I loved being kidnapped or murdered, or something happening to one of my pets was really terrifying to me. Like somebody doing something cruel to an animal that I loved. I was terrified of all of those things happening. Or something bad happening to, one of my parents. Something happening to like a sibling, as a kid was less terrifying to me, but something happening to my parents, like,
You got a lot of them to spare. You only have 2 parents.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Huh?
I just said numerically speaking, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
When you went there with the pets thing, I was thinking that makes sense for the 80s, because what was that movie? Fatal Attraction?
Exactly. That was the sort of I very early had a real connection with animals and loved animals so much, and I always wanted like more cats or dogs or, birds or hamsters, or like I always wanted animals. And my mother, who was raised on a farm and, had 8 children, was always like, no more animals, no animals, no animals, so it was this constant fear I had of like, something happening, or, I also had older siblings who, behaved like older siblings. Like, what if something happens to my, somebody would threaten your animal. That was a way of like getting you to do something.
As a good older sibling does. Yeah.
The thing about siblings are it really trained me a lot in terms of socialization, in terms of understanding that like hierarchies and understanding like the way that a lot of systems work. Because as a sibling, you really, especially when there's a lot of you, you form alliances.
Politics is the word you're looking for.
Yeah. There's a lot of politics, right? And when you're younger, you're not privy to a lot of the more subtle interactions that happen. And so you're constantly trying to catch up. You're constantly trying to learn. You're constantly trying to like make them appreciate you and value you and protect you.
You didn't mention which religion, so I don't know which way you're going to answer with this, but did you participate in Halloween?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, definitely.
Favorite costume?
Well, as a child, I was always like a princess. I always wanted to be a pretty thing.
Mm-hmm.
But do you mean favorite costume like now as an adult or just as a kid?
We'll get to that when we get to the adult section.
Right. Okay. So as a kid, I always wanted to wear like a fluffy dress or like I always wanted to be something pretty. Okay. So I never wanted to be anything scary. I think I was actually really terrified. I was really terrified of being unattractive. I was really terrified of being an outcast, which in many ways I was, but it scared me, like if there was some reason to put me down in the pecking order, that was always like something that really, really scared me. My body sort of like turning against me, those were things that like frightened me very much.
Okay.
If there was something wrong with me that would make people shun me or not want to be around me.
Looking back through some of the stuff that we've talked about so far, I would say the theme that I'm seeing, at least for this portion of your life, is power, either obtaining it or fear of it, which makes sense. That's often the case for a lot of kids. When you think about early childhood development, the thing that kids don't have much of is agency and power. So that's not strange. Did you have anybody in your family who was a fan of horror at that age?
I did not have anyone who was obsessed with horror in the genre category. Okay. However, I would say my entire family is very morbid. they're a morbid bunch, and tend to think about death a lot. And my older sister was very fascinated by, horrible things. Yeah. But there really was a difficulty in obtaining media that.
Well, like you say, there's a difference between horror as a genre and what you're talking about, which I would describe as staring into the void.
Yes. There was a lot of staring into the void around me and an understanding of that. And that was not like that was not true of, other people in my neighborhood or other people in my, friends or friends. But my family, I think, had a fairly,
introspective,
I would say, healthy sense of, mortality and of the evil that is out there.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any scary or reoccurring dreams as a kid?
I had a dream. I used to have this reoccurring dream that all the houses were falling down.
Like as you were walking down the street, were they falling down around you, or?
No, that it was like this, like, it was more like it was like an earthquake. Like I was hearing about it on TV, like these houses just like dominoes were falling down one right after another. We were trying to make sure that like, where are people, who's where, and I was, where are my parents, where are our siblings? So I had reoccurring dreams about that. I don't know at what age I started to have reoccurring dreams, like kind of about like malevolent forces, like just like the sense of like dread of like something was possessed or something was evil. There was a great evil in that house, or there was a great evil that happened in this place, or, so I would have reoccurring dreams about like some place or some place or house that had some sort of demonic force. And then there were also like kind of dreams about people who you thought were good, but then were bad. They suddenly turned evil on you. So I had like I would say that those are kind of societal like fears of people or, places being possessed with like some evil.
Of the three that you mentioned, the house is falling down and where are my parents and where are my siblings, that one kind of makes sense because that's like a common childhood fear of, being lost or, losing your connection to the things that keep you safe. Yeah. Good people turning on you, betrayal, obviously in a family where the political things are as they are, that one also makes sense. The evil in a place or a house, that one, I feel like it's a little vague. Like I'm missing something in.
Oh, well, I'll tell you, I think that, so my parents went through a divorce.
Mm-hmm.
So there was fighting between my parents, and there was like this kind of sense of like something's happening to break us apart.
Mm-hmm.
Something's happening. So I think that was probably like my parents splitting up that really fueled that fear.
Mm. Yeah, I could see how that could make sense in terms of, there being evil in the house. Of there's a lot of upheaval that would go along with all that.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point though. Like, you see it in a couple of horror movies too, like that one with the mirror where there's the parents fighting, or there's Amityville. I mean, there's always a tone, and there's always a tension between parents. So maybe that naturally just gives the dark tone of some tension in this house. And as a child, you just envision it as something otherworldly, like there's an evil ghost in the house, when really it's just you can cut the angry tension between two parents that are getting divorced with a fucking butter knife.
Right.
Yeah, and whether you believe in it or not, there are a lot of people that will say that, angry spirits and poltergeists and things like that are often influenced by the living people in the house, which that's a whole nother topic.
That's a whole other podcast.
Well, but I was raised believing like that there are, not that like my parents talked about it, like my parents are both, college professors, like they're intellectuals, so they didn't spend a lot of time being like, oh, demons, stuff like that. But the religious culture that we were part of, very much believes in demons, very much believes in like, evil spirits and things like that.
Potentially segueing into my next question, was there anything in real life that actually terrified you at that age?
My cousin, who was my age, who lived in a different state, was hit by a car and killed. And she was hit by a 16-year-old driver, and she was hit like crossing the street, getting from the bus, getting out of school. She was 8, so I was 8 when that happened, and that's
pretty jarring. Loss of a family member or a loved one at that young an age, like just dealing with that whole process is
yeah, and it really, like, for me personally, there was there's a level of unreality that you deal with as a child, because
at first it's like, no, they're not gone. It's going to be back to normal tomorrow, just like a TV show. Everything's going to be back to normal, and then the days go on, this will never happen to me, and then it does, and there's the day or so of denial at first, and then afterwards you just kind of, things are different,
Yeah, it really, like, that, I think that really shook my mom's sense of faith entirely. And my mother started to go down this path of feminism. Some dangerous ideas for women.
Feminism.
So where she started to think things about, questioning authority and questioning, the roles of women, etc.
Whoa. Who told you could question things?
Exactly. So, and I watched, my mom sort of getting outcast, not only being a dangerous, her ideas became very dangerous in her way of speaking about her feelings about the religion that we were all in, and her ways. It became very dangerous, and there was meaning that, like, people. It became a sort of situation where it was like, what do I do? Do I identify with her, or do I not identify with her?
Right.
Do I worry about her going to hell, or do I agree with her? So there was a lot of scary questions happening, terrifying ideas. And at the same time, I was grappling at a very young age as a child with my own sense of, like, do I believe in this church?
Oh, did we lose you? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I thought we lost you.
No.
Nope.
I was like, what, is there a follow-up? Is there a follow-up question?
Yeah. Did anything, well, I guess it kind of does lead into a follow-up question. I was going to ask, typically the follow-up question, if something traumatic happened in your childhood, is, did that affect your life moving forward? And potentially it could have. I mean, you started to talk about, do I identify with my mother? Worry about her going to hell, or in your own faith. So how did that kind of play out?
Oh, it definitely, like, so I guess, so what ended up happening is my parents ended up getting divorced. My mom ended up and this will lead, I guess, into my teenage years, because my parents got divorced when I was like in seventh grade, end of sixth grade, beginning of seventh grade, or they separated then, and that ended up leading to the divorce. And I transitioned from, I didn't want to be the person that I had been before, and I wanted to be somebody else. And how could I do that? So I started to get kind of like much more like, all right, how do I be cooler? How do I get more friends? How do I be more popular? How do I, that kind of transition. And then we ended up moving, at the end of 8th grade to a place in Nowheresville, New Mexico, that really changed everything for me, because, whereas I had lived in a sort of middle class, semi-suburban area, I moved to a very, very rural, poor town in the middle of nowhere, and had to sort of reinvent what I felt like I was.
Did you go with your mother or your father?
Yes. Yeah. So my mother and 3 of my siblings moved to New Mexico, and that's where I started my my high school. And that is about the time that I started to get into, like, I would say between like 6th and 8th grade, I started to, so I was a voracious reader. Like, I read and read it. Like, I loved to read. I still, like, every time I go into a library, I'm like, my friends, I love you so much.
17 hours later.
Right. No, I love them so much. I said to my dad when I was a kid, I was like, what if I read all the books? And he was like, there's no way.
Right? Like, what if I read all the books? What do you mean all the books? I mean all the books. All of them.
And he basically was like, that's not possible. You can't possibly do that. And that was a great comfort to me.
It's comforting to know there will always be more books.
There will always be more books. That makes me so happy. So probably around 5th grade, 4th or 5th grade, I kind of graduated out of like all of the books for children, and I started reading smutty, like, adult pulp books, and bad romance novels, and then I started reading Stephen King, and then I started reading B.C. Andrews, and I started reading, like... Oh,
God, you didn't get into Danielle Steele at a young age, did you?
I did not. Well, I might have. I don't know. Like, they're probably not as good as Danielle Steele, honestly. Like,
wow.
They were always
discount Danielle Steele.
There were always things like, weird things in weird places with men with, like... And I didn't quite even understand it, like, men with, like, bulges and, something bulging in his pants.
A wallet?
Weird.
Right? Like, as a young reader, you're like, guys are really bulgy. Do they all have tumors or something? I keep reading about all these bulges.
And I start to read all these sex scenes, and of course, like, I mean, I never saw anything. Like, the most I saw on TV would be like people kissing. Right. So the whole idea of like reading now about, like, the sexual act, I was like, weird, wild, ooh, sexy. But there were still books, so most people didn't think to look at what I was reading. So I could just I started just devouring stuff, and then B.C. Andrews is like, I mean, all sorts of crazy shit happens there. So,
yeah, I'd say it's probably as good enough transition as any to the adolescent years.
One question I want to ask, though, then is, because you had mentioned being a voracious reader and what you said to your dad about, being afraid of running out of books. Did that happen in your teenage years, or did that happen even earlier?
Oh, that running out of books happened when I was probably like 5 or 6 or 7 or 8. I don't know. Like, I was young when I was like, I would just pour through books. Like, I could relate.
No, I'm with you. I read a lot as a kid. It's funny. The other thing I thought of when you were talking about this is when we interviewed Nicholas Berman Vince, I think it's Berman Vince.
Berman Vince.
The Chatterer from Hellraiser. He had a very similar situation, except it was the reverse. He had a very almost traumatic event in his childhood when he was very saddened to realize that he would never be able to read all the books.
That's right.
So it's funny that you were comforted to realize, no, I will never run out of books. There will always be more.
Yeah. That to me would be like a type of hell to like have them all be done. I'm like, no.
There's no more.
You can reread the other one. It's not the same.
Right.
Not the same.
So you started going into the pulpit romance, Stephen King. So it's a little bit of a jump to go from pulp and romance to Stephen King and DC Andrews. I mean, how did that happen?
I think so. My dad likes old detective stories and like some things that are kind of like noiry. And I think he was reading Stephen King. And I picked up one of Stephen King's books. I think it was Firestarter, actually. I think that was my first. And so I just started reading Stephen King because it was there. So I read like Firestarter and The Dead Zone, and
your dad was okay with that.
Those like, yeah. Yeah.
I don't even mean from like the Mormon aspect of it. I just mean for like, knowing what's in some of King's books to have a kid read some of that stuff.
Yeah, they're tame.
Well, I think that like, yeah.
I mean, Firestarter isn't as bad as some of them, but
yeah. And by that point, like I was probably, and now we're starting to get to the point in the, and my parental involvement in my, he would see what I was reading, but like when they started to get separated and divorced, then too, like that was, they had bigger things that they were dealing with than what I'm reading. Like that was the least of their worries. They had other big problems.
As long as it wasn't porn or feminist book, they were okay with it.
Yeah, right. One of the biggest, and I had stopped like when, 6th grade, 7th grade is when I stopped going to church too. So they were trying to get me to go back to church. Not my mom, but my dad was. And so yeah, they were more concerned when you were with things like that.
North Carolina, New Mexico?
No, I stopped going to church in Utah. And that was a really like big deal because people who never said anything to me or cared all of a sudden started being really nice to me and trying to get me to go back to church. Like it was like a big deal. Like they were like, oh, we have to get her to go back to church. Like, I remember like hiding when one of the women from my ward came over and like tried to like have a talk with me about coming back. And I was like, oh no. And I went and hid until she left. And anyway.
Yeah, there's some power control issues there. So let's see. You started picking up your dad Stephen King's books, and somewhere in there you moved to New Mexico.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing it was DC Andrews after you moved to New Mexico?
I would say DC Andrews was the same time. I probably started that while I was still in Utah. And, I think I read like Flowers in the Attic while I was like in 7th or 8th grade. But then I just started, pouring through all of those into my freshman year. Pet Sematary and It and The Stand and the stuff that Stephen King wrote as the other guy that he put out. Remember how he had this other, what was his other alias?
I know what you're talking about, but I can't think of it either.
Was it Richard?
Ramirez?
No, he had a bunch of books that came out under a different name, but I can't remember what that was right now.
I remember there was somebody that did like there was some reviewer too. They just said this guy writes a lot like Stephen King.
Yeah. So I ended up reading like so then I just started reading a lot of that kind of stuff. Lots of Stephen King and when I was younger, like when I was still like in 6th, 7th grade, I started reading Daphne du Maurier too, like stuff like Rebecca and The Birds, stuff like that. So I was going into like these kind of mystery and thriller type stories.
A little bit PG-13 Agatha Christie.
Yeah.
So, I mean, obviously with Stephen King, there's definitely still some of that staring into the void stuff, but was there some other aspect to it that you were getting out of it now too, or was it still that?
I mean, I just thought his writing was really fun. Like, I didn't find it necessarily scary as much as I did. Like, the beginning of it was terrifying. But then by the time I got to the end, it wasn't scary to me at all. But the beginning of it was really, really scary. Things like the ending of Pet Sematary like made me weep. It was so, but not the very ending, but when his son dies, is hit by the car, that just, for obvious reasons, and he has this dream about his son growing up. I can remember just like crying and crying as I was reading that. So yeah, there's still the existential stuff that you get out of Stephen King stuff, but also I found it really like fun and compelling and interesting, and I liked his way of writing and telling a story.
What was fun about it?
I loved the idea of like the way his monsters are always like, and this is I think what I love about horror in general. I tell people a lot of times that like I don't love all horror as a genre. Like there's lots of it I don't like, but the horror that I love is my favorite stuff. And the reason why I love it is because to me, it's almost like a fairy tale. There's this kind of epic way that it's an archetype, that it stands for something, and that makes it easier to deal with the reality of the thing when you can kind of externalize it as a monster or as this epic sort of conflict that gives you a sense of control and efficacy, that you can examine something that you don't have when something's just reality.
Like say something more like a Guillermo del Toro fantasy rather than Saw torture porn.
100%. Yes.
You started a sentence that you didn't finish. I wanted to go back to that. You said Stephen King's monsters are always...
They're always wonderful metaphors, I think, for human desire or human villainy or human. They're great monsters. He has great monsters, and so I always I find him a really fun writer. I love reading him.
Okay. What did I want to ask you? Oh, you commented about how horror makes it easier to deal with the fear, gives you some control, lets you examine it, externalize it. Did you already have that understanding at that age, or is that something that came later?
I mean, I don't know. It's kind of, it's easy for me to say, yeah, I got it then. I think I had, if I didn't fully understand it, I definitely had some capacity to make that argument, because that was an argument which I would make to people about, and I was already writing things that were darker at that point, and I would start, saying that like this is a, to me they were kind of funny and interesting, and I would play with like the humorous aspect of it or the kind of social fear aspect of it. And so for me, they were standing in for reality. They were not representational of my reality.
Understood. But you're talking about reading this stuff from the ages of like 6 to 10, and you're saying you're already writing darker stuff at 6 to 10?
I would say that.
Sorry, sorry, not 6 to 10 years, 6 to 10th grades.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I started writing. So probably around like 9th or 10th grade, I started writing darker things. And then in 11th, I would say 9th and 10th grade, I started writing like darker things. Not wholly. I kind of gave up. When I was really young, I really wanted to be a writer, and I would write all the time. When I hit high school, I kind of was like, no, nobody's really a writer. Nobody really actually is a writer anymore. That's all of the time passed.
They're writers. They're just not, they're not rich, is all.
Right. Well, so, I know, but this was, my 9th to 10th grade brain. I was like, this is, so I kind of gave it up as it was something I just kind of, I did it off and on. I didn't think of it as something I was going to do with my life or wanted to be anymore. It was just something I was doing to do.
Okay. So we've talked about King and DC Andrews. Any other strong influences in your teenage years?
I read a lot of Ann Tyler. I had a friend who was really into Ann Tyler, so I read it. These are not horror; these are other stuff. I started reading J.D. Salinger like obsessively. I obsessively read Salinger, and then later, probably like my junior year of high school, my best friend introduced me to Kurt Vonnegut, and I became absolutely obsessed with Kurt Vonnegut. Like, and I still pretty much am obsessed with Kurt Vonnegut. So then I spent the next like 3 years reading everything of his that I could.
And you mentioned that, for example, Ann Tyler wasn't horror, but how do you think this tied in with where you were going?
Ann Tyler writes these really lovely character pieces. The characters and the families and the relationships are so beautiful and real. So the work of, say, Ann Tyler gave me a real sense of preciousness of relationships, I would say. How beautiful and strange and complex a relationship can be, and worthy of note.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I also started reading things like that's when I also started reading Edith Wharton, and I started Dostoevsky stuff, and getting into like this. I read The Idiot when I was 16, and I really loved it. That really compelled a sort of idea and understanding in me, which it wasn't until I think I reread it that it hit as deeply as it does for me now.
You mentioned compelled an understanding. What understanding?
There's the purity of love. A pure heart in this world cannot survive.
All right, I was gonna make a crass, sarcastic comment. I was, oh, you pronounced the Iliad wrong, but now I am genuinely interested in this work because, yeah, I like that.
I mean, it's he's a pure heart, and
there's no happy ending.
Well, I mean, no, certainly not. But the tragedy of it is that everybody is acting according to their own. Nobody wants to hurt him. In fact, quite the opposite. But just the harsh reality of what people's emotions are and ability to love each other.
This is Dostoevsky. Okay, it's Russian. That explains everything.
Yeah. yeah.
Let's see. What about Salinger?
So the book of his that meant the most to me was Franny and Zooey. That, and that's a brother and sister story. And the sister, she starts doing this Jesus prayer and becomes kind of obsessed with the mediocrity of humans and like basically everybody's attempts at self-aggrandizement, and she's trying to find her own path to mysticism, I suppose, and makes herself really sick. And her older brother, who's an actor, basically having this conversation with her. So it's two long monologues in a lot of ways, but it really spoke to me about acceptance, how to accept oneself even as one is trying to feels like you want to be better than everyone else, and even in like as a spirit, like you don't want to be a human, and I've struggled a lot with that my whole life. I really, in many ways, find the participation in being human itself a demoralizing, disgusting like experience. Like I really hate being a human. That has been a common theme in my consciousness, that I don't like being complicit in what humans do and what humans are.
Relate.
Yeah, so it's difficult because when one realizes that you don't want to behave or think or participate in something that you find morally reprehensible, you can take some steps to change that. But at the same time, there's a danger because you can't, in many ways, actually avoid a lot of the things that are just part of what being human is. And if you think that you're better than other people, well, you're not. And
whatever you do is going to hurt somebody.
Well, and you can't avoid certain things like eating or
you have to go to the store, so you have to interact with someone. Therefore, you have to be social, and you have to like do this thing called conversate. When it's like, can I just grunt and you give me the thing and I give you the coin?
Well, it's like that trolley meme of, do you flip the switch and go left and hurt these people, or do you flip it that way and go right and hurt those people?
Mm-hmm.
It's life is like that. There is no easy answer. All you can do is intend the best.
Yeah.
Right, and do the best you can to sort of, be
minimize the pain.
Yeah, like right now, what I'm going through a lot of like eco grief and trying to be, how do I behave in a manner that is in line with my values, and that it's impossible it's impossible to live in this world and participate in it and not be complicit in things that I, don't agree with.
I'll bring up one of my favorite authors, as has come up many times. Are you familiar with Joseph Campbell?
Of course.
Never heard of him.
If you go back historically to the earliest dawn of civilization, that religion was in large part a way to essentially, we like to say that our brains are pattern finding machines. I like to also say that we are also emotion processing machines. And I think religion was in large part a way to process the difficult emotions of exactly what you were just talking about a few minutes ago. That
absolutely.
Absolutely. And even more so back in history, you didn't have a choice. You had to kill that animal and eat it because otherwise you'd starve.
Right. And catch it and hunt it, and the kind of work that went into that. Yeah.
But you were saying in reading Franny and Zoe?
I always said it Zoe. I mean, I don't know. It's got two O's. Yeah. So
that's the way I wrote it. So that's what I said. So I'm guessing you were saying that, in reading that helped you come to terms with some of that stuff. So here we're talking more about the relationships, but you did also say at the same time you were starting to write this darker stuff. I'm guessing then maybe that some of this stuff that you were writing also related to relationships, or no?
Yes. Yeah. I can remember I wrote like I had never seen The Razor's Edge, but like I was writing a story that was very similar to that kind of idea, except for it was a bunch of friends who end up killing like their most annoying friend on a camping trip.
I've actually seen that in a couple of indie films recently. It was one Super Dark Times, I think. These kids, one of them accidentally kills another one with a samurai sword, but he was the annoying one.
Right. And so, yeah, I started writing something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and I started writing like a story about a husband whose wife is working and he's making her dinner and he's slowly like feeding her cat.
Oh,
it's a terrible story.
No, that is a great story.
It was a I thought it was funny, but like, like.
Have you seen Whiskers? No.
Well, he started like with just a leg, so all of a sudden Whiskers didn't have a leg.
Oh no! So did the cat like start like keep losing more limbs, and she's still oblivious?
I know.
And like he wouldn't be afraid of the husband, like.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, and then yeah. Anyway, stories like that for me that were kind of jokey horror, I guess.
Yeah, campy.
Let's see. Any scary dreams or repeating dreams in your teenage years?
I started dreaming a lot about the Terminator when I was a teenager, like that there was this thing following me that couldn't die. And that I couldn't escape, but I was constantly trying to outrun it.
Kind of ties in with the power stuff that we talked about.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The stuff that we're talking about in your teenage years, I wouldn't even necessarily say it was horror specifically, other than, the fact that there's some Stephen King in there. Would you even classify yourself as a horror fan in your teenage years, or would you say that came later in the adult years?
No, that would be later. I would say me classifying myself as a horror fan would be the last like 15 years.
Okay.
Where I would be like, the last 15 years I've been, into it, and I would classify myself as a fan. Before that, I would say the things I liked were all kind of elite prep school where I had never been type stuff. Like I would say I like Edith Wharton. I like J.D. Salinger. I like all these things that make me seem, smart and intelligent and all of those. Like I didn't identify with what I would consider kind of the lowbrow horror genre. Because
you're one of those A24 fans, aren't you?
I am. I totally am.
Also, yes, guilty as charged.
Yes, guilty as charged. I had a fairly, I think of it as like a self-protective, like snobbery of like, I need to represent and think of myself in a certain way to escape. To escape.
Escape what?
I gotta get out of here.
Escape what?
I gotta get a scholarship.
Oh, wow.
So that was really it. Like I had to get a scholarship. I had to get out. That was my directive pretty much sophomore year on. Like I needed to feel like I could do something else with my life besides what I felt was before me.
Makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought the best way out was to like take advantage of, how well I did in school and how well I did in school, all of the extracurriculars I did, things like that. So I was really working toward getting into a good college and making something of my life.
As one does.
Yeah.
That laugh, you're just like, yeah, and look how successful I've been with that.
Right.
Back to the drawing board. No, I can definitely relate. And I think most people can relate too. There's a lot of people who college is their chance at making something better for themselves, and not only for themselves, but maybe, as a representative of their entire family. There's a lot of people who are still to this day, first person to go to college in a family.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was the first person in my family to not go to BYU. That was, and that was actually very difficult for me to do. I did have to get a scholarship and have that paid for me to do that.
Adult years, instead of, I think I'll approach this a little differently. Instead of asking about your biggest influences, you talked about how, it was maybe only the last 15 years that you would start identifying as a horror fan. Let's talk about that. How did that happen? How did that come about?
I started finding myself interested in those. It started basically with noir. I really started falling in love with old noir stories, whereas I used to really kind of love more adventure things about adventure. And I loved Twin Peaks. Like Twin Peaks became like, I loved that first season of that. And then I started to, look at stuff that is more horror, but horror and noir and those kind of like stories started to really attract me. And then from there, like that became, especially like kind of art house horror became really, really interesting to me. For the same reason that I think that like when I was really young, I really liked fairy tales. They started to speak to me of these really powerful metaphors. And as I became an adult, my sense of powerlessness felt like it increased exponentially. Like, well, maybe not exponentially. I felt as powerless as an adult as I did when I was a child. Like graduating from college and like, I moved to Los Angeles immediately. And that being in Los Angeles
I was just
did not help.
Yeah.
I felt very much betrayed by everything idealistic in me. I felt like all of the idealism and everything that I'd been taught about, what's good about the world was not true. It felt very much like I don't know how to live in this world. Yeah. So I started to get attracted to a lot of the noir stories and a lot of that. And starting with noir.
I'm not sure if noir really meets modern life. So was it that you were saying, okay, I don't know how to live in the modern world, let me explore this other world? Or
No, I think noir definitely does, because basically what noir says is that you might try to fight for like what's you feel is right or what you feel is the mystery, or you try to solve it, but at the end of the day you don't really change, but you understand that you're not going to change. You understand that the world isn't going to change, and you understand that you are not going to change. And so at the end of it, there's this kind of awakening. It's a story. It's an awakening story to living in the darkness.
Okay.
With a dash of nihilism.
Right, a lot of nihilism, and that was yeah. So I started being attracted to those kind of like murder stories, mystery stories, and about that time, I started to write my first scraps of what became Haunt, my first novel. Sort of thinking about. I kept imagining myself, I guess, like dead in a bathtub. There was a lot of me imagining myself like dead in a bathtub, or a person dead in a bathtub, or death. Maybe it was that painting of the death of Marat, or is it Marat? Yeah. So then I started writing this like ghost story, I guess, and it scared me a lot. Like I was like, this is really dark, and it scares me, and people don't know this about me. They don't know that people think I'm nice, and they think I'm nice and like sweet, but like I have a darkness in me, a real darkness.
So I do see some start of a connection there towards horror.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a ghost story, and I wrote it in a lot of scraps while I was working a shitty customer service job and hating my life.
Yeah,
as one does.
As one does. And I was thinking.
So how else did this move you towards horror? I mean, you've got the one book you're talking about, but what else happened?
So and then I met John Skip.
Okay.
I met John Skip at an audition.
I can see how that could be very horrific.
And I would say
in a good way.
I would say that my friendship with him and my I started to he kind of opened up this understanding for me of what was modern horror besides Stephen King.
Okay.
So that was the genre in which he has lived his life, and through our friendship it really opened up a lot of works to me that I hadn't previously seen or understood.
Like?
So, I mean, he likes a lot of, like, just stupid horror. Like, just, like, kind of, like, what? Like, I can't even remember. Like, it's, like, this movie Demons that he loves. It's, like, where all these demons just come into a movie theater and just, like, eat people's heads, or I don't know. And
let's narrow it down to the things that you both enjoyed. How about that?
Well, I learned to enjoy them. That's the thing. And like there were things that I'd seen before, like The Toxic Avenger. Like I remember like so there were these, in retrospect, creepy college boys hitting on me and another friend of mine when we were freshmen in high school. And they like took us into like the main dorm common area, and they showed us movies like The Toxic Avenger, and I was like, gross.
But fun gross.
This is gross. I don't really like it. But basically I just became more and more desensitized till now I'm like, yeah, cool. So yeah, it built my I started having an appreciation for all of these other weird kind of things that I hadn't seen before. Yeah. So I would say my friendship with Skip was a very pivotal moment for me, really discovering how much I loved horror.
Maybe helping you translate it, shall we say.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Setting that potentially aside, I mean, some of the stuff that you both looked at might fall in here, but then in your adult years, what would you say if we were to say you pick your top three either most favorite or most impactful horror media? What would you say?
So right now, I'll tell you right now, my favorite, like Get Out, is one of like my all-time favorite horror movie. It's one of my all-time favorite movies. It's just incredible. I love A Girl Walks Alone at Night. I love The Invitation. I love Midsommar. I love The Descent.
Mm-hmm. First and second?
I didn't see the second one, just the first one.
Yeah, you're good. Just keep it with the first one.
Yeah.
Well, let's stop. Go ahead.
I think The Descent is actually like I saw that movie before I met Skip, and that was like one of my big like I loved that movie.
Yeah, it's another good example of good tone and cinematography and just claustrophobia.
Well, and the thing that killed me about it, that I saw, like, I loved the relationships between the women and this belunking, and then all of a sudden they're trapped, right? But the scariest thing is that before we even see the monsters, like it's terrifying before the monsters even show up. It's just it's an incredible, and already the horror between them in their relationship.
Oh yeah, and they don't shove it down your throat either. Like you just know that given the angle of the pipe and where it went in the car and when it went out the car, it's the child is dead too. Dear.
Yeah.
Also, I didn't even catch it until like the 5th or 6th rewatching that was the reason that Juno barely saw her when she visited that one time, and that was the tension. There's a little bit of love triangle thing going on there that I didn't even see. It's a good one, that one.
Yeah.
Hang on a second, because we've already got 5 there. So let's go back to Get Out.
I think that's enough.
What do you love about Get Out?
Oh wait, can I just say? I just want to say one more.
Sure.
The Babadook. I love the Babadook, and I want to talk about a little bit about her second movie, The Nightingale.
Ooh, that was a rough one.
Okay,
that's hard to get through. But good in the end. I mean, definitely a good revenge story. Nightingale was great.
It's a war movie.
It's based on war times and real facts, which
it's that dose. It's not really a horror movie to me, because a horror movie gives you a little bit of distance in some way, a little bit more epic. That to me was a true like war movie that actually fucked me up for life. I feel like that movie changed me.
So
I don't think I really understood colonialism before that. I don't think I really got it physically. And after seeing that, and I didn't, it also made me want revenge so much. And I actually don't think it is a revenge movie. She doesn't ever get really revenge. There's no real revenge. There's no getting back. There's no...
Well, she sings to him. That's revenge. That's I forgot about that. I think I actually changed the story in my mind to she gutted him.
No, like halfway through it, I turned like my Ezra was like, "Do you want to leave?" And I was like, "No, I have to." She has to. I kept wanting revenge. I was like, "There's got to be a revenge." But what the movie does, which is truly incredible, is that it reveals to you that there's no way to get back at someone for that. There's no reciprocity. There's this horrible, awful thing happened, and you can't undo it. There's no undoing it. There's no making it better. It's awful, and that's what it is. But after that, there is still standing up for yourself. There is still expressing who you are. There is still saying, I am not this. I am that. And there is still that beautiful moment where she's made a connection and a relationship, and you both watch the sunrise together. You know, there's always the possibility of starting again, but not starting over. You can't start over. You can start again from where you are. Anyway, so she's an incredible director. I just love her work. But yeah, so I also just wanted to bring up the Babadook.
What do you like about Babadook?
To me, the Babadook...
it's another metaphor movie, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a metaphor for grief. And that you can't... how much it possesses you and takes you over, and if you deny it, it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it destroys you.
I was thinking to myself, through some of the stuff that we've talked about, I think I have a pretty good handle on what I would say is a summary for you. And some of it was wrapped up in some of the things that you just said there. So rather than spill that at this particular moment, let's just jump to some of the wrap up questions, and then we'll talk about the summary. These wrap up questions, they don't just cover horror. They can talk about any genre, and it's not any particular time of your life. It can cover your entire life. And the key here is to see if something else pops up that we haven't talked about yet, or if it's just underlying things that you've already said. So it could go either way. The first 2 questions I'll ask at the same time, because they could be the same answer. They could be different answers depending. But the first 2 questions would be, what is your favorite movie, and what movie have you watched more times than any other?
So I asked my I asked my partner this question last night because I listened to I listened to your podcast and I was like, okay, Ezra,
did your homework.
Ezra, what's my favorite movie? And he said, "Which way is the wind blowing?"
Like, what time of day is it?
Right, because it changes. It changes.
For half a second, I thought that was the name of the movie. I was about to start writing it down. I'm like, oh,
it's a great movie. But then I tried to say it like, okay, like we're on the new Newlywed Show. What would you say? Like, so I guess I would say my favorite movie, which is, I would also say the movie I've seen more than any other movie, would be Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Okay.
Just because that movie I have a lifelong relationship with. That was like the first movie that I saw that made me feel like life could be an adventure,
Okay.
And in the horror, because there are so many, because I mean, everything, like all of these things that we've just kind of talked about kind of come up. Like there's Nazis, there's like Bible shit happening, wrath of God, existential, people's faces melt,
Yeah,
like,
literally.
But in it all, he's still Indiana Jones.
Right. Do you see any common threads about what kind of horror you like? Cannibalism, occult, metaphysical?
I mean, I would say it's all kind of metaphysical and social metaphysical.
Mm-hmm. Get Out's a good example of that.
Yeah.
Any idea why it is that you like those things?
I feel like the social is horrifying. I don't know anything scarier than a group of people. I mean, it's pretty terrifying.
Accurate.
And metaphysical because ultimately, like, in the hurricane, as Job says to God, why? That is the answer. Who are you to ask why?
Right. Who is an ant to ask why should you crush me?
Right. Right.
Right. So the next question is why horror? And for the society is horrifying. I can think of other genres that could touch on that.
But they can't in the same, they can touch on it, right? Like even like let's say Lord of the Flies, right? That's not horror, really. That's just more like a social drama, maybe? Mm-hmm. Or would you say that's a horror?
I would say it's social thriller or suspense, if anything, but not really horror, no. It's drama.
Okay. Right. It's more of a drama. But like it's not fun, right? Is it a fun book?
Yeah.
I mean, not for me.
I had a blast.
So there's something about horror that I feel like allows you to access the same sort of message, but have a little bit more fun with it.
Okay, so horror accesses drama plus humor.
Well, yeah, like, so Midsommar is a perfect example of this, right? It's, this woman dealing with grief and at the same time a kind of take on like the Wicker Man or whatever, right? But what it does is there's enough over the top horror elements of it that it gives you a sense of distance. And within that, you can find a sense of like joy. There's a sense of joy for me in that movie.
Like it allows the humor because it distances you so much because of the jarring craziness that you see, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is there anything about that's relevant that we haven't discussed?
Relevant to
what it is that you love about horror, yeah.
Relevant to my relationship about why horror makes us happy. Yeah. I don't think that we've actually talked about how looking at this and addressing what is horrible makes us, in a way, more whole, healthy people.
I think you're kind of going in the direction of the summary that I was going to wrap up with. So maybe I'll just jump into that and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong or see if there's something else that you want to add to it. So looking back through the notes that I've been taking through the call, the things that have come up for me are power, relationships and politics, the fact that the world will not change. There is not necessarily a payoff. Standing up for yourself anyway and starting again, not over. And really, if I were to boil that down even further, it's grief and the response to grief.
Ooh, I love it. That's
Which
good.
is
That's
like,
good.
And
that's really good.
That ties into like how it's good to watch horror because that allows us to have an outlet for grief, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, specifically for her. I mean, the things that she has been raised in, and there's a lot of different elements of her past that tie into a lot of those different elements that I just talked about. And one of the other interviews that I've watched that I really liked was author Robert Bly. And I know I've shared this with Chris. There's a moment in this interview where Robert Bly says, he talks about desire and a lot of relationship, not just marital relationships, but even just interpersonal relationships, like with your own self. A lot of people get to a point where they realize that they're not going to ever get the thing that they truly desire out of life. And the proper response to that is grief. And I like what he says here. He says grief, not blame, grief. And then how do you, of course, the answer is, how do you respond to that? And there is a process for dealing with grief, and that's, counseling and 12-step stuff. And there are answers to that.
But you don't just absorb it and keep it inside forever until you burst.
I mean, that's that is also an option. There's also unresolved emotion.
I'm going to start fires someday. Fires, plural.
So, that's I think the summary for me. Now, like I say, if you'd like to add something to that, feel free.
Did you all see the movie Apocalypto?
Yes. There's a Mel Gibson film about, it's kind of like a historical, almost about...
It's like an Aztec culture.
Yeah.
Mayan culture. But
what about
it's incredibly violent.
Yeah.
You see a lot of people getting their heads chopped off and rolling down, like...
That's why their temples have the steps. That's why they build them that way. So, just,
right?
For fun, bounce.
I watched that movie, I think, a year and a half ago, after something had triggered me very, very strongly. And it made me feel so much better. It made me feel so much better because it had this element of civilization's end. Things come to their own, end, and you don't even know exactly where the end is coming from. But there was a sense of hope for me in like that feeling of what will be next, what could be next, and like,
there's the dread and grief of the fact that this current iteration of life that we're in will end, but you're right. You can just turn that around and say, well, it's also hope and just an overall good feeling that something else will begin.
Yeah, and even though you don't know what that is, right? Like, and it's the same thing as like that existential like void, right? You may die and your individual consciousness will be over and you will have no sense of who you are or what you are or that you ever were. But you actually don't know what you are or what you ever were. So
nothing matters. Nihilism wins.
or it matters a lot, but it's all this, cosmic thing, this cosmic drama that we are in, that we don't know what the ending of it is. We just are playing it.
To go back to Campbell, which I often do whenever Chris brings up the nihilism quote of, Campbell's response to Bill Moyer's bringing up nihilism is, he said, but is that necessarily the response? Why don't you could just as easily say, I will pick up this gun and go to war. I will fight the fight. I will make the struggle. There's still something to be gained in doing that. Like that's a personal choice. You could decide, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to check out. Goodbye. But you don't, that's not necessarily the only choice to be made.
Right. And then one could argue that like, just the fact that we're here, that we are incarnated beings having a human experience is on its face, this like, using a theater cosmology, like we have this role. We're here. Right. We don't know what it is exactly, but we can improvise until the curtains close.
Yeah, it's the beginning of the play, the end of the play, the fact that the play exists at all. It doesn't matter. You have a role and you have a character, so you have that.
You have given circumstances.
Yeah.
you know. Who's writing it? I don't know. Who's directing it? We really don't know. Do we trust the director? I don't know. but you do have a role.
Yeah. And as I said, and some people can choose to throw it away if that's their choice, but you don't have to. That's not the only necessary choice. Well, thank you very much for your time. It was a good call. I've enjoyed this.
Yeah, thank you. It's been great talking to you. Thank you for that was a really nice summary. It gives me I actually would not have picked grief as the
what would you have picked?
I don't know. I guess I would have picked something about mysticism or understanding existence, or something. That's what my mind would have gone to, something like existential, like what's the purpose, what's the meaning. But truly, it actually, you really have done a therapist's job here of helping me find grief. Because I'm like,
hang on, because hang on, because I said two things. I said grief and the response to grief, and what you're talking about, I think, is your response to grief.
Yeah, but I think one of my habits is I skip over in my own conscious as I look at things, the thing that triggered that, that grief that you just talked about is a really important thing to look at.
It can be, but it's also important not to dwell on it either. So there's definitely a balance between the two, and each person.
But I think that's what keeps me with horror. I think that it is that grief that attracts me to horror.
Well, as we kind of said earlier about the adventure, you can't have adventure without danger. How do you have a response to grief if you didn't have the grief in the first place?
Yeah.
Or how do you have
it gives you the chance to talk about how you respond.
Yeah. Awesome.
I just realized as I was about to hit the closing here, we forgot to give you a spot at the beginning to talk about whatever it is that you're currently working on.
Oh. Yeah. My plug would be, just to go to my website, because I have some things coming up that I'm, still that are still a little up in the air. So those will be announced on my site at lauraleebahr.com.
We'll create a bio and put that in the bio.
Okay, great. Yeah. So my website, and I'm part of this cool anthology that's going to come out. That's it's a bunch of writers. It's called Koalas and Smoke, and it's raising money for the Australian animals that were needing rehabilitation in the Australian wildfires. I'm really, really happy to be part of it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But so that's something that I have coming out. There'll be more things that I'll talk about later. Right now, what I'm really working on is, I guess, just go to my website. it'll all come out. And then to plug, yes, my books are, anybody who wants to read my stuff, it's on Bookshop. That's where I recommend getting it. I mean, you can get it on Amazon and stuff like that, but Bookshop's a nonprofit and they do awesome work. And you can watch Boned on many streaming platforms. And if you're willing to watch commercials, I believe you can watch it on Tubi for free.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Well, thank you again for your time. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Also, thank you to anybody out there listening. Please do come visit us at horrormakesushappy.com. We will put together a bio page for Laura and link to her site over there. We've also got links to our social media pages. You can come say hello and let us know how we're doing. Links to merch and Patreon and all kinds of stuff like that. So if you want to support, please do. And thank you very much.
Merch.